The convoy arrived at 9:14 inches the morning. 3 black SUVs and 2 sheriff's cruisers, moving in a line down Millbrook Road like something out of a funeral procession, except nobody here had died yet. Ethan Cole heard the engines before he saw the vehicles. He was in the yard, splitting firewood. The maul came down, and the log split clean. He set the 2 halves aside and straightened up, watching the column of vehicles slow and pull to a stop along the gravel shoulder in front of the fence. The air smelled like pine resin and cold soil. Mid-November in Harlan County, Oregon. The kind of morning where you could see your breath, and the light came in low and pale through the firs. Lily was on the porch steps, watching. She was 7 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that changed depending on the weather. This morning they were gray. She'd pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, the way she always did when she was reading something serious. Except there was no book, just the vehicles. Victoria Hale stepped out of the lead SUV. She was 36. Dark coat, heeled boots, hair pulled back. She moved across the gravel with the efficiency of someone who had never once in her professional life been told no. Behind her came 2 men in suits, lawyers, by the look of the briefcases. Then 2 sheriff's deputies, one of them already reaching up to adjust his hat against the cold. Behind the lawyers came a man Ethan recognized. Dennis Pruitt, county assessor's office, who Ethan had spoken to 3 times in the past 18 months. Dennis didn't make eye contact. Victoria stopped at the fence. She looked at the house. She looked at the woodpile. She looked at Ethan, Mr. Cole. Her voice carried. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being heard without raising it. "I'm Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Land Partners. I believe you've received our correspondence." "I've received it," Ethan said. He set the maul down against the fence post. Unhurried, the taller of the 2 lawyers stepped forward and produced a document from his briefcase. Thick stack of papers, blue cover sheet. He held it out across the fence. Ethan took it. He read the first page, then the second. His expression didn't change. Victoria watched him. "This is a court-issued writ of possession, Mr. Cole. The county title to this parcel was formally transferred to Hale Land Partners, LLC 14 days ago, following the adjudication of your grandfather's estate in probate court. You've been occupying this property without legal standing since November 1st. My grandfather left this land to my wife," Ethan said. He didn't look up from the document. "Your wife passed away 4 years ago. Her estate was not properly probated. The title reverted." Ethan turned to the 3rd page. "Read it." He could hear Lily's feet on the porch steps behind him. She had come down to the bottom step, but she didn't come farther. One of the deputies shifted his weight. He looked uncomfortable. He was young, mid-20s, new to the county. He kept glancing toward the house. "Mr. Cole," Victoria said again, "we have law enforcement present as a courtesy, not a threat. We're giving you until noon today to remove your personal belongings. After noon, we'll be changing the locks and beginning site preparation. The county will assist with the physical transition if necessary." Ethan looked up from the papers. He looked at Victoria Hale for a long moment. She held his gaze. She had a face built for holding gazes, the practiced composure of someone who had won a great many negotiations. He looked at Dennis Pruitt, who was now staring at a spot approximately 6 inches above the fence line. He folded the papers in half, then in half again. "All right," Ethan said. Victoria blinked. Just once. She had expected an argument. "Beau?" Lily said from the steps. She said it softly. Ethan turned and looked at his daughter. The morning light fell across the porch boards and the 2 clay pots of dead flowers his wife had planted the spring before she died. "Go get your coat, sweetheart," he said, "and grab the blue bag from the top of my closet." Lily looked at him for a moment. Then she went inside without a word. Victoria Hale watched this. Something crossed her face, not guilt exactly. Something closer to the slight irritation of a person who is prepared for resistance and found none. "You're making the right decision," she said. Ethan didn't answer. He walked back to the woodpile and picked up the maul and carried it to the shed. He did this slowly and deliberately, the way a man does when he wants to remember the weight of a thing. The lawyers spoke quietly to each other. One of the deputies wandered to the edge of the fence and looked at the land. 14 acres. Old-growth firs along the north ridge. A creek bed that had run dry 2 summers ago and come back. The house was small cedar shake siding, a stone chimney, the roof patched in 3 places. It was not a beautiful house in any conventional sense, but it was the kind of house that looked like it had been lived in honestly. Inside, Ethan moved through each room. He took the blue bag from the closet shelf. Inside it, beneath a wool blanket, a metal box, the kind used for storing important documents. Gray, slightly dented at one corner, with a 4-digit combination lock. He checked the lock, turned the numbers, opened it briefly, looked inside, then closed and locked it again. He packed 2 bags, clothes, toiletries, Lily's drawings from the kitchen wall, the photograph from the windowsill above the sink. His laptop. The metal box. He went through each room without rushing and without sentiment, not because he was not sentimental about the house, but because sentiment was for later, and this was work. He had learned this distinction from Claire, who could feel things deeply, and also set those feelings aside cleanly, when there was something that needed doing. It was the most useful thing she had ever taught him, and he thought of her teaching it as he folded the last item and closed the second bag. He did not pack quickly. He did not look rushed. Lily stood in the hallway with her school backpack and her coat already on, watching him. "Where are we going?" she asked. Ethan looked at her. "Motel on Route 7 for now. Then we'll see. Are you sad?" He thought about this honestly, the way he always did when she asked him real questions. "Not right now," he said. "Why not?" "Because sad is for later." He picked up both bags. "Right now I need to be thinking." They came out the front door at 10:40, 1 inches the morning. Ethan locked the door behind him out of habit, then handed the key to the taller lawyer without being asked for it. Victoria Hale was standing by the first SUV, on her phone. She saw them come out. She said something into the phone and lowered it. Ethan walked past the fence, past the deputies, past the lawyers. He loaded the bags into the bed of his truck, a 2009 Ford, rust on the wheel arches, new tires. He helped Lily into the passenger seat. He went around to the driver's side. He paused there, one hand on the door. He looked back at the house. Victoria was watching him. She expected something, a final word, a threat, a look. Something to mark the defeat properly. He got in the truck and drove away. The Millbrook Motor Inn cost $62 a night. Room 7 had 2 twin beds, a bathroom with a cracked tile above the sink, and a heating unit that made a sound like a small dog clearing its throat every 40 minutes. Outside the window, the parking lot lights came on at 4:30 because the days were getting shorter. Lily sat on the bed nearest the window and opened her backpack and took out her library book. It was about ocean navigation. She'd been on a marine biology phase since August. She read 2 pages and then set it face down on her knee. "The lady in the black coat," she said. "Is she the one who took our house?" "Her company did," Ethan said. He was at the small table. Laptop open. "Is that different?" He considered this. "It's relevant." Lily looked out the window. There were 2 police cars. Deputies. From the county. "Do they think we did something wrong?" "No." He typed something. "They were just there, to make sure things stayed orderly." "Did things stay orderly?" "Yes." She picked the book back up. "Read another page. Set it down again." "The box," she said. Ethan looked up. "The metal box you put in the big bag," Lily said. "Mom used to touch it sometimes. When she was on the phone and she thought I wasn't watching, she'd put her hand on the top of it like she was making sure it was still there." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Your mom was careful about things," he said. "What's inside?" "Proof," he said simply. Lily seemed to consider this answer and find it sufficient. She went back to her book. Ethan turned back to the laptop. He opened a browser and navigated to a secure email service, not Gmail, not anything standard. He logged in with a username that was just a string of numbers. He composed an email. attached 3 files from a folder he'd accessed with a second password, and sent it to 2 addresses. Both recipients were people he had spoken to before, an environmental attorney in Portland who had been tracking the Caldwell contamination case independently, and a former EPA regional investigator, now working in private practice, who had reviewed his documentation twice over the preceding 2 years and told him, both times, that what he had was substantial, but that timing and the correct legal forum would be everything. Then he opened a second application. It looked like an ordinary file manager. He spent 20 minutes going through folders, opening files, checking timestamps, cross-referencing. His face was neutral throughout the face of a man running through a checklist he has rehearsed many times. He had rehearsed it. He had gone through the full checklist 17 times in 3 years, checking each piece of evidence for authentication, each document for chain of custody, each recording for metadata integrity. He knew exactly what he had, and exactly what it was worth, and exactly what it required. At 8:15 p.m., he called a number from memory. "It's Ethan," he said. "They executed the writ today." A pause. "Right. I need the Stanton filing moved up. Can you do Monday?" Another pause. "I know it's short notice." "I know." He listened. "All right. Tuesday morning then, but I need the full package submitted before noon." He listened again for a long time. Yes, all of it. Environmental, the title chain, the Whitmore correspondence. Yes, he rubbed the back of his neck. "I appreciate it, Raymond. I know what I'm asking." He hung up. Lily was asleep. She'd fallen asleep with the book open on her chest, the way her mother used to. Ethan sat for a while in the dim light of the room. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the metal box on the floor, beside the bag. Outside, a truck rolled through the parking lot, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window, and then gone. He opened the laptop again and worked until 2 in the morning. The offices of Hale Land Partners occupied the 14th and 15th floors of the Meridian Building in Portland, Oregon. Victoria Hale arrived at 7:30 a.m. as she always did. Past the lobby desk. Into the elevator. 14th floor. She walked through the open floor plan, without looking at anyone in particular, which was how she walked through most spaces, as if she were navigating by a private map. The Millbrook acquisition had taken 11 months, 3 rounds of legal maneuvers, a probate challenge, 2 filing delays, and 1 recalcitrant county assessor who had needed considerable persuasion. 14 acres that sat directly in the middle of a proposed renewable energy corridor that Hale Land Partners had spent 4 years assembling piece by piece. The full corridor, once complete, would unlock a federal infrastructure grant worth $340 million and position the company for an IPO they'd been preparing since the previous spring. Without the Millbrook parcel, the corridor had a gap. With the gap, the grant was jeopardized. Without the grant, the IPO was complicated. Ethan Cole's 14 acres had been holding up $340 million for 11 months. Now they had it. Or they would, once the site was surveyed and cleared, and the paperwork filed with the county. Marcus Webb, the CFO, was waiting in her office. He was 53, compact, with the energy of someone who had been anxious since childhood, and had simply learned to channel it productively. "Smooth?" he asked. "Smooth," Victoria said. She set her bag down and sat. "He just left. No legal action? He had a lawyer present the options 18 months ago, and got nothing. I don't think he has the resources for another round." She pulled up her email. "Begin the survey. I want environmental clearance filed by end of month. Already scheduled." Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. "The EPA filing from last spring, the one for the northern sector, cleared," she said. "Right." He nodded. "Right." He left. Victoria sat for a moment in the quiet of her office, looking at her screen. The northern sector of the corridor included land that had previously been held by Caldwell Environmental, a subsidiary that had been absorbed into Hale Land Partners 6 years ago. The acquisition had come with certain liabilities, remediation obligations, groundwater monitoring requirements that had been listed in the transfer documents, and then, quietly, not pursued. She knew about the obligations. She had reviewed them during the acquisition. She had been assured by Marcus and by the legal team that the obligations had been addressed. She had been told this several times, in meetings and in memos. And she had not pushed hard enough on the specifics because the deal was moving, and the corridor was the priority, and the environmental liability had been characterized as legacy minor, manageable, distant. She had told herself this at the time. She believed it at the time. She believed it now, in the way that a person can continue to believe something they have stopped examining closely. On the 17th floor of the same building, in a small internal legal office, a woman named Patricia Osei pulled up the Millbrook file and went through the title transfer documents for the third time that week. She was 31, had been with Hale Land Partners for 14 months. She had a law degree from University of Oregon, and the particular discomfort of someone who has found a problem they have been told is not a problem. The problem was this. The probate adjudication that had transferred the Millbrook title to Hale Land Partners had relied on a representation that Claire Cole had left no valid testamentary documents. Patricia had found, buried in the supplementary filing from the county probate court, a reference to an unrecorded instrument that had been assessed as insufficiently documented to affect the proceedings. The reference was a single line. Most readers would have moved past it without a second look. Patricia had not moved past it. She had pulled the underlying court record. The unrecorded instrument was a handwritten addendum to Claire's grandfather's original deed, a document that, under Oregon law, could constitute a valid transfer of interest if properly authenticated. It had not been submitted for authentication. It had been characterized as unrecorded and therefore inoperative. She did not know whether this characterization was an error or a decision. The difference between those two things was enormous. She flagged 3 items in the document trail. She drafted a 3-page memo. She sent it to Marcus Webb. Marcus read it at his desk. He read it twice. His face, while reading, was the face of a man discovering that a door he believed to be closed is in fact only leaning against its frame. He forwarded it to no one. He deleted the forwarded draft. He marked Patricia's email as read and moved it to a folder labeled Internal Not Priority. He called the survey team and confirmed the Millbrook schedule. Then he sat for a while looking out his window at the city and thinking about what he knew and what he had done with what he knew, and whether those two things would ever be separated cleanly by someone with the authority to separate them. The metal box had belonged to Claire Cole. Claire had been 33 when she died. She'd been a licensed environmental consultant, the kind of work that took her to sites where companies had done things they preferred not to discuss. She had worked for 3 different firms over 9 years. And for the last 14 months of her life she had been working as a contractor, which meant she was hired project by project and was therefore less subject to the institutional pressure to look the other way. In her last contract, she had been hired to conduct a Phase 2 environmental assessment on a parcel of land in Harlan County. The parcel was part of a larger land assembly, being quietly gathered by a company called Caldwell Environmental. The assessment was supposed to take 6 weeks. It took 14 months, because Claire kept finding things. Ethan had not known the details while it was happening. He'd known she was stressed, that she was working late, that she came home sometimes with the specific exhaustion of someone carrying something heavy they couldn't put down. He knew she was making copies of files and storing them in the metal box, because he'd seen her do it. And she'd looked up at him and said, "Insurance," without elaborating, and he'd trusted that explanation because he trusted her. She died in April. Her car went off Highway 30 at a curve above the Nehalem River at 6:40 inches the evening, in conditions that were later described as suboptimal, some light rain, reduced visibility. The official finding was driver error. Excessive speed on a wet curve. Ethan had not accepted this finding at the time, and he had spent 3 years not accepting it quietly. Gathering what Claire had started gathering, the metal box contained the following: 62 pages of soil and groundwater test, results from a site in the northern sector of what was now Hale Land Partners Energy Corridor. The The results showed trichloroethylene contamination at levels 30 to 40 times the EPA safety threshold. The tests were dated. Signed, witnessed. A chain of internal communications between Caldwell environmental executives, obtained through a source. Ethan had spent 2 years cultivating discussing the test results and the decision not to disclose them to regulators or to the landowners whose well water drew from the same aquifer. A series of emails referencing a Whitmore arrangement, an agreement with a local county official, now retired, to ensure that permitting for the land assembly moved without environmental review delays. 3 signed affidavits from former Caldwell employees regarding the disposal of hazardous materials on site. A copy of the original deed to the Millbrook property, with a notarized certification of the chain of title from Claire's grandfather, establishing Ethan's legal claim with considerably more clarity than Hale Land Partners' lawyers had accounted for, and a USB drive containing digital copies of all of the above. Plus, 40 hours of recorded conversations Claire had made quietly, legally, under Oregon's one-party consent law, during meetings where the disposal decisions had been discussed. Ethan had added to this over 3 years. He had continued what his wife had started. He had done it without fanfare, without confrontation, without filing anything prematurely, because he had understood from the beginning that timing mattered. He had waited until Hale Land Partners executed the writ, until they had fully committed. Then he had called Raymond Stitch, the attorney who specialized in environmental litigation and land fraud, and he had said, now. Tuesday morning arrived with a hard frost. At 9:02 a.m., Hale Land Partners' primary operating account, the one from which payroll, vendor payments, and project disbursements were drawn, received a freeze notification from the Oregon Department of Justice. At 9:17 a.m., the company's secondary accounts received similar notifications. At 9:34 a.m., a representative of the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division arrived in the lobby of the Meridian Building and asked to speak with the company's legal counsel. At 9:51 a.m., 2 special agents from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality arrived with a warrant to inspect files related to the Harlan County land corridor. The trading floor of Hale Land Partners had, in the past 24 hours, been anticipating nothing more complicated than a routine survey completion meeting. The freeze arrived without prelude. It moved through the office the way a power outage moves: first the stillness, then the sudden awareness that something fundamental has stopped. The compliance officer, a man named Gerald Haas, who had been with the company for 11 years, walked into Marcus Webb's office at 10:03 a.m. and closed the door behind him. "Marcus," he said, "we have a significant problem." Marcus was already on the phone. He held up one finger. Gerald sat down and waited. He waited for 4 minutes, watching Marcus's face. What he saw on Marcus's face during those 4 minutes was informative. Victoria was in a meeting on the 15th floor, a planning session for the IPO roadshow, when her assistant knocked and entered and leaned down and said something quietly near her ear. Victoria listened. She thanked her assistant. She waited for the other people in the room to finish the sentence they were constructing. Then she said, "We'll need to pause here," and stood up. She walked to the elevator. She rode to the 14th floor. She walked into Marcus's office. Gerald Haas was still sitting there. Marcus had put the phone down. There were papers on his desk. "Tell me," she said. Marcus looked at her. In 20 years of professional life, Victoria Hale had rarely seen Marcus Webb look uncertain. He was looking at her now the way a man looks when the structure he has been confident in turns out to have been load-bearing only in certain weather. "Someone filed a comprehensive environmental fraud complaint with the DEQ," he said, "and with the DOJ, and with the EPA." A pause. The filing references Caldwell Environmental, the northern sector, groundwater contamination, an arrangement with county permitting. Victoria was still. "When was this filed?" "Yesterday." "Monday at 11:52 a.m. She did the arithmetic. 11 minutes before noon. 1 day after the Millbrook writ had been executed. The filing," she said. "Where did it originate?" Marcus looked at the papers on his desk. "The attorney of record is Raymond Stitch. Environmental litigation. Portland." She recognized the name. The name was in a file she'd read 18 months ago, in a brief summary of potential legal opposition to the Millbrook acquisition. It had been categorized as low risk. The client, at that time, had not yet filed anything. His client, she said. Marcus picked up one of the papers. He didn't need to read it. Ethan, Cole. Victoria stood in the office for a moment. The frost was visible on the window behind Marcus's desk, a thin lace of it across the lower panes. "What are they saying we did?" she said. "Suppressed environmental testing results. Falsified remediation documentation. Coordinated with a county official to bypass review." Marcus set the paper down. "There's also a separate complaint regarding the Millbrook title. A claim that the probate proceedings were pursued through documentation that misrepresented the state of the original deed. We relied on legal counsel for all of those proceedings. I know. We did not manipulate the probate." "I know," Marcus said again. He said it with the specific emphasis of someone who is confirming a fact, while simultaneously aware that the fuller picture is more complicated. Victoria looked at him. "Marcus." Her voice was even. "What do I not know?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Patricia Osei sent me a memo 3 weeks ago," he said, "about some irregularities in the Millbrook title documents. I never saw that memo." "No. Why didn't you forward it?" He didn't answer. Victoria stood in his office and understood several things simultaneously. She understood that she had been insulated deliberately from certain categories of information. She understood that this insulation, which she had attributed to the natural efficiency of delegated authority, had been something more purposeful. She understood that she had signed documents and attended meetings and driven the Millbrook acquisition forward, while the people around her had been managing what she knew and what she did not. She was not absolved by this understanding. She had been in command. She had prioritized speed over scrutiny. She had pushed her teams hard and accepted their reassurances without adequate verification. But the specific fraudulent decisions, the buried test results, the county arrangement, the manipulated documentation, those had been made and implemented by people who had known that she would not ask the right questions at the right time. "Get legal on the phone," she said. "All of them." She walked to the door. "And Gerald, don't let anyone remove or transfer files. Anything that leaves this building today is obstruction." She walked out. The creek on Ethan's property, the one that had dried up and come back, fed into a larger drainage system that ran north through the Harlan Valley. In 2016, Claire Cole had taken 17 water samples from that drainage system over the course of 4 months. She had taken them at different points and different times of day, mapping the contamination gradient. The results had told her something specific. The source was upstream, on a site that belonged to Caldwell Environmental. She had submitted a preliminary report to her contracting firm, recommending a formal investigation. Her firm had returned the report to her with suggested revisions. The revisions suggested less specific language regarding the source. She had declined to make the revisions and resubmitted the original. Her contract had been terminated. She had kept the data. She had continued taking samples on her own time and her own money from public access points along the drainage. She had taken the data to the Oregon DEQ and been told that the case would be investigated. 6 months later, the case had been closed, with a notation that initial testing by the agency had not confirmed the reported contamination levels. Ethan had the original agency testing records. He had obtained them through a public records request 2 years after Claire's death. The agency testing had been conducted at only 2 of the 17 sample points, both downstream from the concentration gradient. He also had a sworn statement from the retired DEQ field investigator who had conducted that initial review, explaining that he had been directed to limit the scope of the sampling by a supervisor who had since left the agency. He had the Whitmore correspondence emails between a Caldwell executive named Barrett Howe and the county permitting official, a man named Dale Whitmore, now retired to Bend. The emails were specific. The arrangement was financial. The amounts were not large, but the documentation was explicit. He had the affidavits from 3 former Caldwell workers who had been present during site disposal operations in 2015 and 2016 operations conducted at night. Without proper documentation, involving materials that were later listed in company filings as having been disposed of through a licensed facility in Salem. He had the recording of a 2017 meeting in which Barrett Howe and two other Caldwell executives discussed the Phase 2 assessment that Claire had conducted and what to do about it. Claire's name was used in that recording. The phrase used was, "She won't be a problem." She had died 4 months after that meeting. The recording was timestamped. The origin metadata was preserved. Raymond Stitch had had it independently authenticated by a forensic audio specialist. Victoria Hale came to room 7 of the Millbrook Motor Inn on Thursday morning. She came alone. No lawyers, no assistants. She drove herself in a personal vehicle, not one of the company SUVs. Ethan answered the door. He looked at her without surprise. He stepped back and let her in. Lily was at school. The room was tidier than it had been in the first days the beds made, the bags organized along the wall. Lily's books stacked on the small dresser. Victoria looked at the room without commenting on it. She sat in the chair by the table. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. Neither spoke for a moment. "You've been building this for a long time," she said. 3 years, Ethan said. "Claire started it. She didn't finish it." Victoria was quiet. "I read the Whitmore correspondence last night," she said. "My attorney shared the full filing with me this morning. I read all of it." She looked at the floor, then up at him. "The recording from the 2017 meeting." "Yes." "Barrett Howe said your wife's name." "Yes." Victoria was still. "I didn't know about the meeting. I didn't know about Howe's arrangement with Whitmore. I didn't know the remediation documentation was falsified." She said this steadily, making no plea of it. "I understand that not knowing isn't the same as not being responsible." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not. I pushed hard on the Millbrook acquisition. I asked my team to get it done, and I accepted their assurances." Her voice was level, but something in it was unsteady, underneath the level. "That's on me." Ethan looked at her for a moment. "I'm not trying to destroy your company," he said. She looked up. "I'm not interested in Hale Land Partners going under. I'm not interested in you personally being ruined. What I'm interested in is," he paused, choosing words with care, "the contamination being addressed. The aquifer remediated. The county families, whose wells have been drawing from that water for 10 years, they need to know. They need to be compensated." He paused again. "And I'm interested in what happened to my wife being examined by people with the authority to examine it." Victoria looked at the table. "Barrett Howe is still with the company," she said. "I know. He came over with the Caldwell acquisition. Marcus Webb brought him over. I was told he was essential for the corridor project." She said this and then stopped. "I should have looked harder." "You should have," Ethan said. "No heat in it. A fact. The recording," she said. "If it says what you say, it says, you can listen to it. Your attorney can listen to it. It says what the transcript says it says." She nodded slowly. "Then Howe and the people in that room made a decision that resulted in your wife's death." "That's what the evidence indicates," Ethan said. "The formal determination will be made by people with law enforcement authority. That's why I went to the DOJ, and not to the press." Victoria looked at him. "You could have gone to the press," she said. "Yes. It would have been faster, more visible." "Visible isn't what I needed," Ethan said. "Accurate is what I needed. Legal accountability is what I needed. The press would have made it a story. I needed it to be a record." She was quiet for a long moment. "The land," she said finally. "The writ was based on a title chain that the filing challenges. Raymond believes the probate proceeding will be reopened. The outcome will depend on what the court finds." He looked at her. "I'm not asking you for the land. I'm asking the court." "You could ask me," she said. It was a strange thing for her to say, and she seemed to know it. Her voice shifted slightly. "I'm not in the business of asking favors," he said. Victoria stood. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She moved toward the door, and then stopped. "Your daughter," she said. "How is she?" Ethan considered the question carefully. the way he always did. Victoria had asked it the way people ask questions they are not sure they have the right to ask tentatively, as if testing whether the question would be accepted or returned unopened. He decided to accept it. "She's reading a lot," he said. "She's doing fine." Victoria nodded. She opened the door. The cold came in from outside. November light. Thin and honest. "Mr. Cole." She paused in the doorway. "I'm going to cooperate fully with the investigation. Everything the company has. Every file. I'm going to make sure Barrett Howe and Marcus Webb don't have the opportunity to make anything disappear." She paused. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," Ethan said. "But it's what you can do from where you're standing." She left. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed for a while in the quiet. Then he picked up his phone and called Raymond Stitch and told him about the conversation. The week that followed was precise and damaging. Barrett Howe was placed on administrative leave Wednesday. By Friday, the DOJ had executed a search warrant on his home office in Lake Oswego. The agents removed 11 boxes of documents and 4 hard drives. Marcus Webb retained independent counsel on Thursday morning, which was itself informative about what he understood his exposure to be. By Friday afternoon, his independent counsel was in contact with the DOJ to discuss cooperation terms. Patricia Osei was contacted by the Oregon State Bar's ethics office, not because she was under investigation, but because investigators had found her memo to Marcus, the one he had buried, and they wanted to understand its origin and timeline. She provided the memo, the original timestamps, and a full account of the conversation she'd had with Marcus when she'd followed up on it verbally. She did this without hesitation. Victoria spent those days in a conference room with 2 outside attorneys and the company's general counsel, going through every file the DOJ had requested and everything adjacent to it. She answered questions. She provided context. She did not claim not to know things she knew, and she did not claim to know things she didn't. She had always prided herself on clarity, on seeing situations without the distortion of wishful thinking. She understood now that clarity had a condition she had not fully satisfied. You had to be willing to look at the things you most preferred not to look at. She had been willing to look at market risk, at regulatory risk, at competitive risk. She had looked hard at all of those. She had not looked hard enough at the people around her and at what they were choosing to show her. She called the board on Thursday evening. 8 members, 3 of whom she had recruited personally. She told them what was happening in the clear and direct language she used for difficult truths. She told them what she knew and what she was uncertain about. She told them she intended to cooperate fully and that she believed the company could survive this if it was honest about it. 3 of the board members asked whether she intended to resign. She said she would make that determination in consultation with the board, and based on the outcome of the investigation, and she said it without the defensiveness that would have indicated she was protecting a position rather than a company. She had not slept more than 4 hours in 5 days. On Saturday morning, she drove to Harlan County. Not to the Millbrook property. There was a legal proceeding pending regarding the land, and it would have been inappropriate. She drove to a spot on the county road where the contaminated drainage crossed under the roadway. She stood there in the cold and looked at the water. It was unremarkable water, brownish, moving slowly. You would not know to look at it. She thought about the families in the valley. She thought about 10 years of well water. She thought about the Phase 2 report that Claire Cole had written and that had been rejected and buried, and that Claire had continued pursuing anyway, at the cost that it had cost her. She drove back to Portland. On Monday, she authorized the company's environmental liability insurance carrier to begin emergency remediation assessment on the northern sector. She did not wait for the investigation to conclude. The contamination was real. The obligation was clear. She also called the county health department and provided them the original testing data from Claire's assessment data they had not had access to before, because it had been suppressed. The Harlan County Circuit Court reopened the probate proceeding on the Cole estate on the second Monday in December. The new title analysis, conducted by an independent firm, concluded that the chain of inheritance from Claire's grandfather through Claire to her surviving spouse had been continuous and legally valid, and that the filing that had enabled the probate adjudication in Hale Land Partners' favor had relied on documents that misrepresented the status of the intervening transfers. The writ of possession was vacated. Barrett Howe was indicted by a federal grand jury on 3 counts of environmental fraud, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and 1 count of conspiracy to suppress government investigation. The conspiracy count was the one that referenced the 2017 meeting and its consequences. The indictment did not explicitly name Claire Cole's death as a criminal act, because the standard for such a charge is high, and the evidence, while compelling, did not yet meet it. But the DOJ's accompanying press release stated that the investigation into all aspects of the conspiracy's consequences remained active. Marcus Webb entered a cooperation agreement. His cooperation included a detailed account of which decisions he had made, which he had implemented, and which he had concealed from Victoria Hale. The account was specific. It would be tested. The county health notification went out on the same day as the indictment. 43 households in the Harlan Valley received letters advising them that their water may have been affected and outlining testing and assistance procedures. The remediation fund, established by Hale Land Partners under regulatory compulsion and accelerated by Victoria's voluntary authorization, was sufficient for the scope of the work. The company's size was its only advantage in this regard. Ethan attended the court session in December but said nothing publicly. Raymond Stitch spoke to the reporters outside. He was brief. He said that his client's goal from the beginning had been environmental accountability and legal vindication of the title claim, and that both had been achieved through the legal process, which was where his client had always believed they belonged. One of the reporters asked if his client had anything to say. Raymond said his client had work to do. Ethan, at that moment, was replacing the weather stripping on the barn door at the Millbrook property. The barn was old, older than the house, and the gap at the bottom had been letting in cold air for 2 winters. It was a straightforward job, the kind that requires attention to the small details of fit and measurement, and not much else. He worked slowly and carefully. Lily was home from school. She sat on the fence rail and watched him. "Your attorney was on the news," she said. "I know. He talked for a long time. Raymond tends to," Ethan said. "People at school were talking about it," she said. "They said there was something about our land and water and a woman who got in trouble." Ethan fitted the new strip along the bottom rail, pressed it into place, checked the fit. "Yes," he said. "The woman in the black coat? Some of it, yes. Other people too." Lily thought about this. "Is it over now?" Ethan stood up and opened the barn door and let it close again and looked at the seal. "Good. Clean. The legal part is mostly over," he said. "The cleanup will take a while. Some of the other parts," he paused. He did not believe in providing his daughter with false resolutions. "Some parts take longer than courts." She seemed to understand this. She had her mother's capacity for accepting incomplete answers. "But we can stay?" she said. He looked at the house. At the firs on the north ridge. At the creek line through the field, the water, running today, running well. "We can stay," he said. The Millbrook property had been in Ethan Cole's possession for 47 days, when he and Lily drove back down the gravel road in the 2009 Ford, with the rust on the wheel arches and the new tires. Lily got out of the truck first. She stood in the yard and looked at the house. The porch boards. The 2 clay pots where the dead flowers had been. Someone from the county he didn't know who had removed the flowers while the property was in legal limbo. The pots were empty. The woodpile was still there. Whoever had been managing the site preparation had not gotten that far. The power had been disconnected during the possession period. It took 2 days to restore. In those 2 days, Ethan put a new weather strip on the front door and patched a gap in the north wall where the insulation had shifted and split more wood, and went over the remaining legal documents with Raymond on the phone 2 evenings running. Lily unpacked her room methodically, books on the shelf in the order she preferred by subject, then within subject by size, a system she had invented herself and maintained with complete consistency since age 5. The photograph of her mother, the one she had taken from the kitchen windowsill on the morning of the eviction, went back to the windowsill. She set it in exactly the same position. She stepped back and looked at it, and made a small adjustment to the angle, and stepped back again and was satisfied. On the third day, Lily asked if she could plant something in the pots on the porch. "It's December," Ethan said. "I know," she said. "But some things grow in winter." He drove her to the garden center in town. She chose something called a winter jasmine, a small, unremarkable plant with thin branches, which the label promised would produce small yellow flowers in late January. She planted it herself, in the pot on the left. Careful with the soil. She tamped it down the way he'd showed her, and watered it, and stepped back and looked at it. "Is one enough?" he asked. "For now," she said. She set the second pot beside the first and left it empty. She didn't explain this. Ethan didn't ask. Victoria Hale came to the property in early January. She had resigned as CEO in late December, 4 days before the company's restructured board announced a consent agreement with the Oregon DEQ that formalized the remediation obligations and established a community health fund. Her resignation had not been demanded. She had offered it on the grounds that the company's rebuild required a separation from the decisions that had been made under her leadership. She drove herself. She came to the door on a Tuesday morning when Lily was at school. Ethan saw the car in the yard from the kitchen window. He had time to recognize it and make a decision about how to receive it, and he chose to open the door before she knocked. She stood on the porch. She looked older than she had on the morning of the seizure. Not in the way of illness, but in the way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that it shows. "I didn't call ahead," she said. "No, I wasn't sure you'd say yes." "I probably would have," he said. She looked at the clay pots. At the winter jasmine in the left one. "Your daughter's?" she said. "Yes." She looked at the empty pot. "Can I?" She stopped. Started again. "I'd like to do something practically useful. For the aquifer work, or the legal costs, or—" She paused. "I know you didn't ask. I know you wouldn't ask." "No," he said, "but I'm asking to give something." He looked at her for a moment. "The county families," he said. "The 43 households. Some of them have medical costs. The fund covers remediation. It doesn't cover incidental health expenses from the past 10 years. He paused. "That would be useful." She nodded. "I'll find out what's needed and make sure it's covered." "All right." She looked at the porch for a moment. Then she looked at him. "I think about what she found," she said. "Your wife. What she found, and what she did with it, and how she stopped. I think she was a remarkable person." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She was practical," he said finally. "She found something wrong, and she did what was necessary to document it. She didn't think of herself as remarkable." He looked out at the yard, at the firs along the north ridge. She just thought it needed to be recorded accurately, so that when the time came, there would be something solid. Victoria was quiet. "The time came," she said. "It did," he said. She left after a few minutes. He stood on the porch and watched the car turn at the gate and move back down Millbrook Road. The morning was cold, perfectly still. He went inside and finished his coffee. In late January, the winter jasmine bloomed, small yellow flowers. Unremarkable individually, but collectively bright against the gray January light. Lily found them in the morning before school. She stood on the porch in her coat and her backpack and looked at them for a moment. "Dad," she called. Ethan came to the door. She pointed at the flowers. He looked at them. "Good," he said. She picked up her backpack strap, adjusted it, and walked down the porch steps. He watched her go down the gravel path to where the school bus stopped at the road. She had her mother's walk purposeful, a little ahead of herself, as if she were always moving toward something specific. The second clay pot sat beside the first. Empty. It would stay empty for now. That seemed right. He went back inside. There was work to do.